On today's show, new Cavs head coach Kenny Atkinson has a challenge when it comes to figuring out the rotation, and JAYLON TYSON is the guy that's creating that for him. We talk about that and so much more on today's Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast,
part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my new Substack, The Inside Shot, 92.3 The Fan, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. On today's show, I want to talk about Cavs practice. Training camp day 2 here at IMG Academy has come and gone. Talk about what Kenny Atkinson, Max Strus, and Evan Mobley had to say. Talk about JAYLON TYSON as well. But at first, I want to say thank you to you for making this edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen today and making the show your first listen every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Make sure you drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review as well. Also, be sure to check out the show on YouTube. Just search Locked On Cavs on YouTube. Hit that thumbs up button if you're watching the show. Make sure you are subscribed and click the notification bell as well so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. A proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show, of course, is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. So to go over what was said at training camp today, day 2 of Cavs camp at IMG Academy, one of the things that was a big talking point from Cavs head coach Kenny Atkinson today was the state of the rotation. I think right now, the Cavs have 14 players that can serve some purpose on the floor. That is a rarity, I think, in the NBA. I think the Cavs do genuinely have a lot of depth. They've got guys that, if they're not playing, probably can have a legitimate gripe that they should be playing. Now, it's a bit of a double-sided sword, double-edged sword, if you will, to where it's great to have that depth when you need it, but it can be something that at times can create headaches for the coaching staff if you don't need that depth, because you're going to have guys that feel like they deserve to be on the floor and they're going to be sitting on the bench. And that can be a tough thing to handle. I'm not saying Kenny Atkinson's going to have a problem with that, but you never know. So one of the things that is a big question for Kenny, and I think it's really his first big challenge as the head coach of the Cavs, and it's not a challenge that he's going to need to face until October 23rd when the Cavs get the regular season underway. But what does the rotation look like for this team? Now, he has talked at almost every media availability he's had so far, which has been 4 general appearances in front of the media. He's talked about his rotation being 10, 11 guys at the max. So as you go through that, you start to run out of space real quick because you've got the starting 5 of Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Max Strus, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, right? So that's 5 of those 10 or maybe 11 spots. Karis LeVert's going to be the 6th man. I see no reason why he would not be in that same role. Dean Wade is going to play. Isaac Okoro is going to play. So you're at 8 right there. So now you've got 2, maybe 3 spots left for Sam Merrill, George Niang, Tristan Thompson, who I think is probably going to be on the outside looking in, JAYLON TYSON, which I think is a big part of this discussion, Craig Porter Jr., that and Ty Jerome too. So that is a very difficult discussion to have. It's a very difficult problem that Kenny Atkinson is going to need to figure out. So why do I bring up JAYLON TYSON in this? Because so far, everyone has been asked everyone that's spoken, and it's been 4 guys. So it's not as if this is some overwhelming thing, but it's something that has started through the first 2 days of training camp here in Florida. It's that when guys have been asked either who has surprised them so far through camp, JAYLON TYSON's been the answer, or when they've been asked about JAYLON TYSON specifically, they've had really good things to say. Max Strus was asked about JAYLON TYSON on Wednesday, and he said he's been very impressed. He says that JAYLON is doing a lot of really good things without the basketball in his hands, and that, I think, is a very important thing. The fact that he's doing good things without the basketball in his hands, because if you remember back to what Tyson looked like in Summer League, he was impressive. And I came away thinking, okay, this is a guy that's going to have a bright NBA future. He's going to be able to play in the league, I think, for a long time. But I also wondered whether or not that success would translate right away to the NBA, because he's not going to be in a position where he's got the basketball in his hands a ton at the start of his career. Maybe down the road he might, but right now, on the way this team is structured, where you've got two ball dominant guards, where you've got other, Evan Mobley, it sounds like he's going to have a big part in terms of playmaking in this offense. When you've got all of that, there's not room for someone like JAYLON TYSON, who's not established, who's never played an NBA game, to come out and have the basketball in his hands a lot, especially not on a winning team. That's just not how that's going to work. So he's going to have to figure out ways to impact the game differently. He's going to have to be able to be successful without having the basketball in his hands. Max Strus saying that, and he also alluded to it, and that he's somebody that just looks ready for the NBA. And that's not always the case with rookies. I do think Tyson has a bit of an advantage, being the fact that while he bounced around in college, that he was a guy that spent 3 years in college, that he wasn't a one and done guy. He's a little bit more developed. He's far from a finished product, but he's a little bit more developed. He's not as raw as a lot of first round draft picks that we see in the NBA today. Like he's got a little bit more experience. He's got a little bit more development under his belt. And I think the fact that he played for Mark Madsen, who has been at IMG Academy the last couple of days, that he played for him last year at Cal was a benefit. And the fact that he played point guard at Cal was a benefit. That was something that I asked him about at Media Day on Monday earlier this week. And he said something along the lines of that playing point guard last year is something he thanks Mark Madsen for every day, because not only did it make him learn what it's like to play that position, but it also showed him that he needs to know at all times what's going on with every other position on the floor. So if he's got that down, and I don't know that he does, and we'll find out at certain points throughout this preseason, we'll find out as training camp goes along, more guys start talking about him. But if that is something that he picks up and he can be successful away from the basketball, that's going to help him get on the floor. Because right now, as you go through this rotation, all those other guys, for the most part, are known commodities. Even, in Cleveland, we don't necessarily know Ty Jerome all that well. Well, Ty Jerome played in Golden State when Kenny Atkinson was there. So Kenny Atkinson probably knows Ty Jerome better than anyone on the roster does, which is, not necessarily the best thing for the MVP of September, as Kobe Altman called him at Media Day last week. But it is something that I think it gives Kenny Atkinson a better idea. And, Ty Jerome, from what I've heard so far, has had a nice start to his training camp. We'll see if he's able to squeeze in that rotation. But the point being is everyone else on this roster that's coming back is a known commodity. They've all got experience on the Cavs. They've all got experience in the NBA. They're not new to this. They're not new to this team. They're not new to this league. JAYLON TYSON is. So it can be difficult to project him being in the rotation. Now, that said, it's also difficult to hear all the things that we've heard about him from guys like Jarrett Allen. Karis LeVert talked about him yesterday. Couldn't believe that he was only, 21 years old or 22 years old, however old he is, because he's somebody that plays the game. And I know he spent 3 years in college, but Karis talked about how he's somebody who plays the game as if they've already been in the NBA. Like he knows what's going on. And while Kenny Atkinson said that JAYLON TYSON might not have an elite NBA skill right now or an elite NBA trait right now, there also aren't things that he's bad at, right? And that kind of gets back to the larger point about this roster, that the Cavs just have a lot of good basketball players. They don't have a lot of great basketball players, at least not yet. I think Evan Mobley can get there. I know Donovan Mitchell is there. I still have hope that Darius Garland can get there. But they also don't have bad basketball players either. Because right now, I think it's probably fair to say Tristan Thompson's the 14th guy on this roster. Tristan Thompson last year helped out the Cavs. Like the Cavs won games at times last year, in part thanks to Tristan Thompson. When you're getting that from your 14th guy, you feel really good about the roster. But it also means you've got some difficult decisions to make. And how Kenny Atkinson makes these decisions, particularly with JAYLON TYSON. Like if JAYLON TYSON is going to be the guy that everyone keeps talking about, it's going to be hard to keep him out of the rotation. It's going to be hard for him not to be on the floor. He is somebody that everyone has had positive things to say about him. And if that's true, if that's the case, my guess is we're going to see Jaylen Tyson on the floor sooner than later. It might not be right away, but he's going to help this team this year. I can tell that from 2 days of media availability, the way that his teammates are talking about him, the way Kenny Atkinson is talking about him. I think Jaylen Tyson is going to be a big help at a certain point this year. I just don't know if it's going to be day one. So Kenny Atkinson, philosophically speaking, thinks 10 guys is the ideal rotation length. I want to talk about why that is an important thing to know next, right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's episode of Locked On Cavs is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and FanDuel Sportsbook is, as you know, America's #1 sportsbook. So head on over to FanDuel right now, where you can get odds on the NBA. The season is approaching. We love being able to take a look at, what do the odds look like in terms of who's going to win the Eastern Conference this year. I think the Cavs should be in that discussion. If they want this year to be considered a successful season, they better be in the discussion at the end of the year for who is the best team in the Eastern Conference. Now, we know that the Celtics are at the top. They're at plus 165 to win the conference, which are extremely short odds. The Cavs are a little bit longer. They're tied with Orlando at plus 1,800. But after being around Cavs camp down here in Florida for a couple of days, I'm buying the Cavs. I am. I think that they're going to have a really good year. I think that they're going to finish top 4 in the conference, and who knows what's going to happen in the playoffs. Basically, avoid Boston as long as you can, and we'll see what happens. But if you're buying the Cavs the way I'm buying the Cavs, FanDuel Sportsbook is the place to go. Plus, with FanDuel right now, when you get started, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's a pretty cool thing to think about. $200 guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Plus, when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, if you're watching, playoffs are going on right now in baseball, NFL, obviously, we've got a Thursday night game coming up tonight. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Where is that? That is inside the FanDuel app. So like I said, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Head on over to FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com today. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Now for your second listen today, go on over, check out Locked On NBA. They've got the latest insight, analysis, entertainment, news, notes from all across the league. Training camp, not just starting with the Cavs, it's started with everybody. Basketball season is here, and there's no better way to make sure you stay on the game than with Locked On NBA, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and available anywhere you can get your podcast and on YouTube as well. So Kenny Atkinson, I asked him earlier today, as I record this on Wednesday, I asked him about his ideal rotation size, just philosophically speaking, because he says, you would love to play 11 max. As he was a part of the coaching staff for Team France, they would play at times 13 guys in their 40-minute games, which is an absurd thing to think about and just not a thing that can be replicated in the NBA. But I asked him about it, and he said, he thinks 10 is the right number. I think with JB Bickerstaff previously, he thought 9 was the right number. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer to this. And Kenny mentioned in his answer back to that question that, Mike D'Antoni, I should say, he prefers to play 8 guys. Like, he picks his 8 and he just goes right away. Where Atkinson wants to have a little bit more depth. He wants to use that depth. And there are a few reasons why. One of the things that he mentioned is it helps to build on-court chemistry. Now, you might hear that and say, the Cavs don't need that. They've got on-court chemistry. What's all this continuity that they're bringing back? If they're running it back, shouldn't they already have that on-court chemistry built in? You're right. They do have that on-court chemistry built in. But the fact that they're going to be doing some things differently, particularly on the offensive end of the floor, using a little bit more of that depth and using especially early season moments to build chemistry with this team on offense, I think is something that really can help them. And I think having guys be able to play with different teammates throughout their time, say Donovan Mitchell gets 32 minutes a night, giving him the opportunity to play with maybe 6 or 7 different guys on a nightly basis, I think that's something that, while it might slow down the process a little bit, that is something that I think will help out this team as the season goes along. I think if you build that chemistry early, it shows up late. It shows up when it matters. And for this Cavs team to get to where they want to go to, it has to show up when it matters. If it doesn't show up when it matters, they're not going to get to where they want to go to. The other thing that Kenny brought up with this, and I can relate this back to JAYLON TYSON again, but playing more guys is good for development. And you're going to say, okay, JAYLON TYSON, let's see him develop in a Cavs uniform. And that's going to be one of the goals for this coaching staff this season. But development is not just about young guys. Outside of, again, maybe Tristan Thompson, outside of him, I think everyone on this roster still has room to grow and develop. Like Donovan Mitchell, I don't think he's done getting better. I think that this year is going to be the best year of his career, and next year might be better than this. And then after that, we can say, okay, his development might he might be at his peak. But Darius Garland's not done developing. Evan Mobley absolutely is not done developing. I don't think Jared Allen is either. Like, you can go down the roster and say that guy still has room to grow. So by playing more guys and giving more guys opportunity, you can see that development take place in real time. Essentially what this is, what playing 10 guys, 11 at a maximum, what that does is it's a balance between building chemistry, focusing on player development, which we know is Kenny Atkinson's specialty. And when you've got a team that is, I think, as talented as this team is, like I've been saying all week, I'm buying stock in the Cavs. When you've got that, it's a balance between those two things and winning. And ultimately, the winning is the most important, but to get the most out of it, the two other things matter quite a bit. You have to be able to develop. You have to be able to build chemistry. You have to be able to, I don't want to say learn each other, because this team knows each other, and I think that eases things. I think that makes the transition to a new head coach an easier thing for this roster to do, because they're not transitioning to new teammates. But when you think about that, it makes life easier. So again, Kenny Atkinson's ideal rotation is 10 guys, 11 at the most, but you run out of spaces real quick with how talented this team is, with how much depth this team has. You just run out. And that is a problem Kenny Atkinson's going to have to figure out. Now, it's not like it's a bad problem, and I know the word problem it's a negative sounding word, and I get that. Maybe challenge is a better way to put this. Kenny Atkinson's first real challenge is figuring out who's going to play, who's not going to play. And the one thing, like I said, he was asked about the Olympics too on Wednesday and how that plays into this. The one thing that's worth noting from there is, one, France had Victor Wembanyama, but they didn't have, they weren't good enough in the backcourt, as we know. That's why Team USA won the gold medal. But it's also worth noting, because when you do have to have guys that don't make the rotation, there are tough conversations to be had. Those are not easy conversations. Rudy Gobert was not always in the rotation on Team France. Rudy Gobert is a 4-time NBA Defensive Player of the Year. He is a cornerstone of a team that has championship hopes in Minnesota. At a certain point, there had to be a conversation. I'm not saying Kenny was the one to do it, but there had to be a conversation about why he was not going to play as much, or in some cases, really at all, for Team France. The other guy that Kenny brought up was Steve Kerr. And Kenny has been an assistant coach under Steve Kerr in Golden State for the last several years. The Warriors obviously are no stranger to controversy. Steve Kerr's had to sit guys down at times. He's had to have those difficult conversations. And Atkinson said, there really is no one better, in his opinion, than Steve Kerr doing it. And part of it's because Steve Kerr, in his playing career, was a role player where he had to be somebody that coaches had those conversations with. So Kenny being around for that and learning from that, I think, is another really good sign that not only is he going to figure this out, because he will, and as you know, the starting rotation on night one is not set in stone for the rest of the season. It's not as if you pick 11 guys and those are the only 11 guys that can play. No, obviously that's false. But as these conversations do ebb and flow, I think Kenny's prepared to have them. So I do think that's something that, as we just figure out who's going to be playing and what this looks like, Kenny's prepared for that challenge. Kenny's ready to take on that challenge. We're going to see what the finished product looks like, but I think it's time to start preparing for, okay, these are the known commodities. What are the unknowns? Who else can fight for those last 2, maybe 3 rotation spots? What's that going to look like? One of the guys that I think will be in the rotation is Isaac Okoro. I want to talk about what Kenny said about him. And of course, he hit a big corner 3-pointer in the team scrimmage earlier on Wednesday. So we'll talk about that too next on today's Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making today's Locked On Cavs your first listen. Now for your second listen, go check out Locked On NBA. As I said, they've got all the news, analysis, notes that you need from training camps across the league, available everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, of course, and on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On NBA, proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network. So Isaac Okoro signed a 3-year deal to remain with the Cavs after being a restricted free agent this offseason. And I think one of the frustrations that some Cavs fans have had is in the way Isaac Okoro has been used. Now, I think there are some Cavs fans that are frustrated that Isaac Okoro may not have reached the potential that you would hope for a former number 5 overall pick. I get that. I think that's an understandable gripe to have. But I do think Kenny Atkinson sees more in Isaac Okoro, the basketball player, than we've seen so far. I think he thinks Isaac Okoro is going to be able to do more than just shoot corner threes, right? Like that's been his specialty. He's done that. He was a really good shooter last year on a low volume, but there are other things that he can do. When Kenny was asked about Okoro, he mentioned, he's a great cutter, that they envision him as someone that can shoot, that can cut, and that can attack the offensive glass, which the offensive rebounding thing has been a very common talking point for Kenny Atkinson so far during training camp. I think that's very interesting. I will probably talk about that on maybe tomorrow's Locked On Cavs, if not next week, but that is a very, very, I think, interesting thing to think about. But Isaac Okoro is capable of doing that. And Kenny actually did something that I don't think a ton of coaches do. But he talked about Isaac Okoro's contract. And the deal Isaac signed, I don't think was necessarily the deal Isaac would have preferred to have signed. Where it's 3 years, I believe it's $38 million. I think it's all guaranteed. He thinks that he can outperform the contract that he just signed. He said something, and actually I do want to read this entire quote, but he said that he signed a good contract, but now he thinks he can get a great contract because he's talented enough. But it's up to the Cavs to put him in the right positions to do so. The Cavs have not always done that. The Cavs have at times stuck him in the corner, and if he missed a couple shots, the hook was pretty quick to get him out of the game. JB Bickerstaff last year called Isaac Okoro the best perimeter defender in basketball, but yet he didn't play enough minutes to appear on any awards ballots. Not saying he would have won Defensive Player of the Year or been all defense. I don't think those things would have been true. I think JB was being, a little, speaking a little bit over the top. But if he's those things, or if he's anywhere near those things, he needs to play more, and he needs to have a more expanded offensive role. I think Kenny Atkinson has that in mind for him. So that is one of the things that I'm interested to see. And I'm interested to talk to Isaac about what his ideal offensive role looks like. Because if Kenny has these, I guess, bigger picture ideas for Isaac Okoro, I think that can only be a good thing for the Cavaliers. So thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen. Make it your first listen again tomorrow. Very much do appreciate it. You can check out the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else, YouTube, of course. Just search Locked On Cavs. If you're watching this video, hit that thumbs up button for me. Make sure you click subscribe and hit the notification bell as well. Also, you can check out my new Substack, The Inside Shot, where I'm writing about the Cleveland Cavaliers on an almost daily basis, certainly daily during training camp as things are going on. But I very much appreciate those of you who have subscribed. There's a link in the description to this video, so you can go search it out. You can go subscribe. But I want to bring you guys more Cavaliers coverage. I'm doing this every day. I'm going to be doing that every day too. So thank you to those of you who have subscribed there. I would appreciate it if you go click subscribe there as well. But make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Cavs everywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else, and YouTube. And I will talk to you tomorrow.